Number 8. Hollow Tree. In central Ohio in 2010, the bodies of 3 people were found inside a hollow tree. The first clue that something had gone horribly wrong in this small town came when the manager of a Dairy Queen went to check on a co-worker that failed to show up for her shift. Valerie Hawthorne told the Associated Press that when she drove by Tina Herman's home, she noticed that the lights were on inside the house. The woman's truck was also parked in the home's driveway, leading Hawthorne to think everything was well with Herman. But things weren't as they seemed, and Hawthorne grew more concerned when Herman missed a second day of work. Suspecting that something may be wrong, Hawthorne traveled back to Herman's house in Howard, and this time she let herself into the home. The front door was locked, however, so Hawthorne climbed inside through a back window, and upon entering the residence, Hawthorne discovered a suspicious amount of blood. She'd later tell NBC News that there was enough blood in the house for her to know that something terrible had happened. Hawthorne then called the authorities, and an investigation was launched. But not only was Tina Herman missing, but her 13-year-old daughter, Sarah Maynard, her 11-year-old son, Cody Maynard, and her 41-year-old friend, Stephanie Sprang, had also seemingly vanished into thin air. The search for the 4 missing people began after Hawthorne's visit to Herman's home on November 11, 2010. And it didn't take long for investigators to locate Sarah Maynard, who was found gagged and bound, but alive, in the basement of a house nearby. The whereabouts of the other 3 missing individuals were, unfortunately, far more tragic. Herman, Stephanie Sprang, and 11-year-old Cody were found stuffed into garbage bags and were discovered inside a hollowed-out tree in the woods. A supervisor with Ohio's Division of Wildlife named Gary Ludwig reported that the tree had been cut down by wildlife staff. Ludwig said that Knox County authorities wanted to remove the tree out of respect for the victim's family. They also didn't want the tree to become a sort of sightseeing thing for tourists. According to David Barber, the Knox County Sheriff, investigators were led to the victims' bodies by an unemployed tree trimmer named Matthew Hoffman. He was accused of kidnapping 13-year-old Sarah Maynard and keeping her in the basement of his home in Mount Vernon for almost 4 days. Hoffman also killed the other 3 victims before stashing them in the hollow tree, although he didn't say how he ended their lives. Through his attorney, he provided investigators with information that eventually led them to the bodies. Hoffman had become a suspect in the case after his DNA was found on multiple items inside Herman's home, including a large tarp and garbage bags. These objects had been purchased from a local Walmart, and video footage from the store revealed that Hoffman was the one who bought them. Then, through BMV records, they were able to identify him and place him at the scene of the crime. Hoffman had only planned to burglarize Herman's house, but when she and Stephanie Sprang walked in on the man robbing the place, he killed them to keep them quiet. He then killed a woman's son and kidnapped her teenage daughter. From behind bars, Hoffman wrote a 10-page confession admitting to the murders and abduction of Sarah Maynard. And in that letter, he also revealed the location of the victims' bodies. In the end, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 7. Looking for God in all the wrong places. In April 2023, a man from Riverside, California was rescued from a manhole after being stuck in there for a full 3 days. Shortly before 4:10 p.m. on Saturday, April 15th, the Riverside Police and Fire Departments were called to the 500 block of Reading Road after receiving reports of a man being found underground. According to a police report, the 54-year-old man had apparently fallen through a manhole cover, and when officers arrived, they found a crowbar and a hammer beside the open utility hole. After transporting the man to the hospital, he confessed to the police that the tools found at the scene were his and that he'd opened the manhole cover because he was looking for God. But he had no idea it was a 20-foot drop. So, when he fell in and made contact with the floor, he severely injured his right ankle and required surgery to fix it. Officers were later made aware that the man had been reported as an endangered missing person, and although he'd hurt his ankle pretty bad, he was lucky he didn't sustain any other injuries. He apparently stayed alive by drinking septic water, and it's a miracle he didn't get sick from that alone. The man's name has been kept a secret in order to protect his identity, but he'll likely think twice before looking for God in another manhole. Number 6. That's not a mannequin. In 1976, on the set of the TV show called The $6 Million Man, crew members were scarred for life while filming an episode at the Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach. Steve Austin, the show's main character, was supposed to be captured by the camera crew riding in a car along the track of a ride called Laugh in the Dark. This scary ride featured a dimly lit tunnel where demons, ghouls, and skeletons would jump out and scare unsuspecting passengers. And at the same time, the car would jolt from side to side. But while sprucing up the set before filming the episode, a crew member took notice of a mannequin that was hanging from a noose in one of the dark corners of the ride. The $6 million employee wanted to adjust the mannequin, but when he reached out to grab the dummy's arm, it broke off in his hand. At first, he wasn't too fazed by this, but then he saw what appeared to be a bone underneath several layers of decomposing skin. And that's when he realized that it wasn't the arm of a mannequin at all, but of a real man. The hanging corpse was later identified as outlaw criminal Elmer McCurdy, who'd passed away 65 years earlier in a gunfight with the police. McCurdy had robbed a train in Oklahoma in 1911 and had made off with his spoils, 2 jugs of whiskey and $46 in cash. He then laid low in a barnyard near the Kansas border, where authorities caught up with him and eventually killed him. But if he died in the barnyard, how did his body end up at the amusement park? Well, after his death, McCurdy was taken to a funeral home in Pawhuska. Nobody showed up to claim his body though, so the undertaker hatched a plot to make some money. He embalmed McCurdy's body and then put the outlaw on display, charging visitors a nickel to view the man's corpse. Then, after about 5 years of this side business, a carnival man turned up at the undertaker's funeral home. The man claimed to be a long-lost relative of Elmer McCurdy and asked if he could take the corpse so that it could be laid to rest properly. This story was a lie, however, and instead of burying the outlaw, he made McCurdy's body the star attraction of his traveling carnival. Then, for about 60 years, the man's mummy continued to make appearances at various carnivals, haunted houses, and wax museums until finally it wound up at the Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California. But after being discovered by crew members on the set of The $6 Million Man, McCurdy was transported to Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma, where the corpse was placed in a grave, never to be disturbed again. Number 5. The Strange Case of Alisa Lamb. This next story is one of the most bizarre cases we've ever covered on this channel. On February 19, 2013, the body of a Canadian tourist named Alisa Lamb was discovered in a large water tank on top of the Stay on Main Hotel in Los Angeles, California, where she'd stayed as a guest. Alisa was last seen alive on January 31st, a full 19 days before her body was located. She was reported missing on February 1st by her parents, and her remains were found by a hotel maintenance worker who was investigating complaints of low water pressure and flooding by the hotel's guests. Interest in Alisa's disappearance increased 2 weeks later when the LAPD released security camera footage of her acting erratically in one of the hotel's elevators. The video quickly went viral and was apparently recorded on the last day she was seen alive. An autopsy on Alisa's body was performed on February 21st, but they determined that her cause of death was inconclusive. So the LA County Coroner's Office ruled the young woman's death an accident with bipolar disorder being a significant contributing factor. But you may be wondering, what happened to Alisa in the elevator footage? Well, here's where things get really crazy. In the roughly 3-minute video, Alisa enters the elevator alone before proceeding to press the button for every floor of the building. She then stands in the corner of the lift while peering out the open door, which suspiciously stays open even after 20 seconds of no motion in the doorway. She then slowly walks toward the open door and steps halfway out of the elevator to peer around the corner. After doing this, she seems to be frightened and moves to the front right corner of the lift as if she's hiding from someone or something. Alisa then steps into the doorway once again to check on the invisible danger, but this time she moves outside the elevator door, out of view of the camera. She stands there for about 30 seconds before stepping back into the lift, where for a second time she presses every button. But when the elevator doesn't budge and the door remains open, she walks outside the lift again. This time, Alisa turns to her right and appears to speak to someone who isn't shown on the video. She also begins to move her arms in front front of her with her finger spread out and continues to pet the air as if she sees something that the viewers aren't aware of. Alisa then disappears completely out of the view of the camera, walking off to the left of the elevator, and doesn't return. This video went on to receive millions of views as people began to come up with their own explanations as to what happened to Alisa. One theory was that the girl was trying to get the elevator to work so she could escape someone that was pursuing her. But others believe she may have been under the influence of ecstasy or some other party drug. This wasn't proven to be the case though, as no drugs were detected in her body. The last and most believed theory is that she was in the middle of a psychotic episode when the video was recorded, which is supported by Alisa's struggles with bipolar disorder. To this day, it's not exactly known how or why Alisa Lamb ended up in the hotel's water tank, but it was discovered later that the stay on Maine's roof was easily accessible through the fire escape. Alisa could have gotten up there of her own volition, but some still believe that other factors played a part in her untimely demise. Number 4. Dr. Bock Payne. In December of 2022, a psychiatrist was found dead in a frozen pond in Michigan near his house in Leone Township. 32-year-old Bock Payne was discovered 5 days after he was reported missing by his family, who were visiting the man from Illinois for the Christmas holiday. He was located behind his home, where he lived alone in Jackson County. Payne's neighbor and friend Jennifer Dice told MLive.com reporters that the doctor was an only child and that he grew up in Chicago before moving to Michigan shortly before his death. Fordyce also described Payne as an all-around great guy and said that he dropped off a Christmas card just a few days before he disappeared. Payne graduated from the Midwestern University Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine in 2017. He was board certified in psychiatry and had been working for the Behavioral Health Office of Henry Ford Jackson Hospital since 2020. Payne was last seen alive on December 22nd as he left his shift at the hospital. Once authorities were made aware of his disappearance, they checked his home and surrounding property for any clues leading to his whereabouts. But even with help from a drone and police dogs, they didn't find anything. Investigators eventually got access to his home's video surveillance system, which showed Payne leaving the premises on the evening of December 22nd. Drivers then located the man's body after cutting holes in the ice of the pond nearby, and unfortunately, Payne's corpse was found under the ice. The man's cause of death hasn't been reported yet, but it's mostly believed that he died by sudden drowning. He'd likely fallen through the ice of the pond accidentally and became submerged in freezing water, triggering uncontrollable gasping, cardiac arrhythmia, and profound hyperventilation. But the real mystery here is how Payne ended up on the frozen pond in the first place. Investigators discovered that Payne didn't speak with friends, family, or his employer before setting out on foot on the day he went missing. According to his relatives, they were supposed to spend the holidays with the young doctor in Jackson County. But when he didn't return home on December 22nd, they began to worry because it was highly unlike him to disappear without saying anything to anyone about where he was going. The case is currently being investigated, and the authorities are waiting for the results of the autopsy and toxicology reports before coming to any definitive conclusions about Payne's death. Number 3. Who am I? An Australian man named Gabriel Nagy disappeared on January 21, 1987, and the only trace of the man was his burnt car that was found along the side of a road. It was quite unusual for Gabriel to go anywhere without letting his family know ahead of time, so local authorities launched an investigation to see if they could locate him. A few weeks later, a clue turned up when Gabriel surfaced long enough to pull out some cash from his bank account. The trail led police to a convenience store in Newcastle, where Gabriel had purchased camping supplies. However, after that, the case went cold. With no additional clues to go on, Gabriel's family was left with only grief and unanswered questions. And for the next 2 decades, no sign of Gabriel ever surfaced. But just before his wife and kids were about to have him legally declared dead, there was a break in the case. An officer was going through public records when he made a startling revelation. Gabriel Nagy had been alive the whole time, but had sustained a head injury during the car crash he wandered away from. This injury did quite a number on the man, leaving him with no memories of his family or past life, aside from some bits and pieces that came back to him every now and then. Throughout the 23 years he was considered a missing person, Gabriel lived on the street and worked odd jobs until a pastor offered him a permanent position as a caretaker. When investigators finally tracked him down, he was reunited with his relatives. Instead of overwhelming Gabriel with stories of a life he had no recollection of, his family chose to let him put the pieces of his memory back together slowly due to his amnesiac disorder. And today, Gabriel stays in touch with his wife and grown kids, even though he now lives separately from them. Number 2. Dennis Pring. For 10 whole years, a tenant of a house in Bedminster, Bristol, lived with the corpse of his former roommate who'd been left to decompose in the cushions of the man's sofa. In 1998, Alan Derrick found his roommate, Dennis Pring, dead on his couch. Pring was an illegal lodger and wasn't mentioned on the lease of the flat, and Derrick feared he might be evicted if his landlord ever found out that the man had been living there. So instead of getting the authorities involved, Derrick concealed Pring's corpse with cushions from the sofa and 2 armchairs. Then, for the next 10 years, he lived with Pring's decomposing body, never once mentioning his death to the police. Of course, neighbors complained constantly about the foul smells coming from inside Derrick's flat, but even though council officers visited, the man's corpse wasn't found. And amazingly, it wasn't until January 2008 that Pring's skeleton was discovered. Cleaners had been assigned to clean out Derrick's flat after he was evicted following a county court order. When the body was found, Derrick, who was in his 70s at the time, was arrested on suspicion of murder. But he ended up being released without charge, as it was determined that he had nothing to do with Pring's death. Pring was either 65 or 66 when he passed away. Following the death of his wife Patricia, he started drinking heavily, and toward the end of April or June of 1998, he lay down on the couch in the flat and didn't get back up again. Number 1. Ghost hunters find missing woman. In 2015, Vicksburg, Mississippi police identified a murder victim who was discovered by a group of ghost hunters near an abandoned hospital. 69-year-old Sharon Wilson was killed during the early morning hours on Sunday, June 28, 2015. And her body was found by ghost hunters at around 7 p.m. that same evening, right outside the Coon Memorial State Hospital, a closed facility that dates back almost 200 years. Upon investigation, it was determined that Wilson had suffered severe trauma to the head, but her official cause of death wasn't initially reported. In a statement to 48 Hours, Crimesider Vicksburg Police Chief Walter Armstrong said that authorities expected to charge 33-year-old Raphael McLeod in connection with the murder. According to Armstrong, McLeod admitted to having some involvement in Wilson's death, so he was taken into custody along with his nephew, 20-year-old Akeem McLeod, after police officers in nearby Leyland, Mississippi, pulled the criminal duo over while they were driving in Wilson's stolen Nissan Murano. Law enforcement began searching for the woman after Raphael and Akeem McLeod were stopped by Leyland police, who quickly realized that the vehicle they were in had been stolen. Police were then sent to Wilson's home in Vicksburg, and they found that the house had been ransacked. Chief Armstrong later confirmed that, based on DNA evidence, Raphael McLeod was definitely at the home. They weren't sure if his accomplice was with him when he burglarized the residence, however, so Akeem was never charged in connection with the break-in or Wilson's murder. It was later revealed that Raphael McLeod had stalked Wilson before planning his attack. He then broke into the woman's home and tied her up before sexually assaulting her, and after that, he took her to the abandoned hospital and shot her in the head with a gun he'd stolen. He also attempted to burn down Wilson's house after the murder, likely in an attempt to get rid of any evidence implicating him in the crime. Raphael was subsequently charged with the kidnapping and death of Wilson, as well as auto theft and arson. It's unclear what his sentencing was, but he was in jail for 8 months before he escaped and went on one last crime spree. Days after busting out of the Mississippi jail, he held a married couple and their 5-year-old child hostage in one of the bathrooms of their home in Vicksburg. But when he allowed the 24-year-old mother and wife to leave the room, she returned with a handgun and shot him. This allowed her enough time to free her husband, who then took control of the gun and fired additional shots at the intruder, ultimately ending his life. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.